All right, buckle up, everyone. We're diving into the world of Godtear today.
Sounds exciting.
You guys gave us a rule book, so let's crack it open and see what we got, huh?
Yeah. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we're looking at a tabletop miniatures game. And whoa, the setting is pretty wild. Gods have shattered, their essence scattered across the land as these powerful crystals called Godtears.
Godtears. I like it.
And we're not just talking about some random fantasy trinkets here. These Godtears are the key to potentially becoming a god yourself.
Oh, wow. So we're not just playing for bragging rights. We're playing for, like, ultimate power.
Exactly. And that's where Godtear's Champions come in. They're these powerful warriors, each leading a warband of followers, all vying for control of those Godtears.
High stakes, for sure.
So according to the rulebook, the core gameplay is pretty straightforward. You want to win turns, rack up those victory points, and bam, first to 5 points wins the game.
Sounds simple enough, but I'm guessing there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, right?
Oh, absolutely. Godtear is all about strategic depth.
Like what?
Well, for starters, each turn has 2 phases. The plot phase and the clash phase.
Ooh, that's cool. So you're not just charging into battle blindly. You've got to think things through.
Exactly. In the plot phase, you're setting up your forces, making those tactical decisions. It's all about positioning and anticipating your opponent's moves. Then, boom, you hit the clash phase. And that's where things get really interesting. It's all-out combat, unleashing your champions and followers to seize those Godtears.
So it's a balance of strategic planning and then adapting to the chaos of battle.
Precisely. And to add even more spice to the mix, we have this thing called the battle ladder.
Battle ladder. Never heard of that.
It's this cool mechanic that adds a dynamic layer to the gameplay.
Okay, how so?
It's like a scoring track, and certain actions move a token up or down the ladder.
Like what kind of actions?
Well, things like knocking out enemy champions or claiming those objective hexes we were talking about.
Ah, so you're not just fighting for territory, you're also jockeying for position on this battle ladder.
Exactly. The further you push that token to your side, the closer you are to winning the turn.
Interesting. And that ties into winning the game how?
Winning a turn gives you a victory point, and remember, the first to 5 points wins. So the battle ladder is basically another pathway to victory.
Makes sense. Now, I'm really curious about these champions and their followers. The rulebook shows us Titus and his glory seekers.
Right. Good examples. So are champions just bigger, stronger versions of followers, or what's the deal?
It's definitely more than just size. Think of champions like your heroes. Each one is unique, with powerful abilities and a distinct play style. Followers, on the other hand, are more like your supporting cast.
Like a team.
Exactly. Each follower unit supports its champion, bringing its own strengths and tactics to the fight.
And how do you track all of their abilities and stats? Is it all memorized, or?
Luckily, no. Each champion has these awesome cards, one for their stats and skills, and another for special traits, and a one-time use ultimate skill.
Wow, ultimate skill. Sounds intense.
Right. And the coolest part, each card has a light and dark side, representing the plot and clash phases. So as the actions shift, you literally flip the card.
Ah, I see. That's a really neat way to visually represent the different phases of the game, so you're constantly adapting your strategy as the situation changes.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how you actually win those points, though.
Right. Those objective hexes, they're like these hot spots of God-tier energy, and the rulebook says you got to plant your banners on them to claim them.
It's like a king claiming his territory, right? But instead of castles, it's banners infused with God-tier energy.
Love it. So basically, you're fighting for control of these objective hexes because they're the key to racking up those victory points.
Right. And here's the catch: banners can be captured by your opponent.
Wait, seriously? So you can steal someone's banner?
You bet. It's like a constant tug of war. You might think you've secured an objective, but if your opponent manages to snatch your banner, well, the game can change in an instant.
So you always got to be on your toes, defending what you've earned. Now, I'm curious about movement.
Yeah.
How do those champions and followers actually navigate the battlefield? Is it like free-for-all? Or is there some method to the madness?
Definitely not a free-for-all. Positioning is absolutely crucial in Godtear.
In what way?
Well, you can move your models into adjacent hexes, or sometimes they can be placed in specific locations based on certain rules or skills.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about moving randomly. You've got to think strategically about where you want your units to end up.
Exactly. For example, if you want to claim an objective hex, you got to be adjacent to it. And if you want to attack an enemy, you need to be within range.
Ah, so it's all about maneuvering your units into the optimal position to strike. Now let's dive into those actions. I'm looking at the rulebook, and it says each model can only take 2 actions per phase. That's a pretty tight restriction, isn't it?
It is, but that's what forces you to make those tough decisions.
Okay, give me some examples of those actions.
Well, you can advance your models, moving them across the board.
Makes sense. What else?
You can use skills, unleashing those unique abilities that we talked about. And of course, there are ultimate skills, but those are one-time use only.
Right, you got to use those strategically.
Exactly. And then you have claiming objectives, rallying from knockout.
Wait, knockout? You mean your champions can get knocked out?
They can, but don't worry, they're not out for good. They can rally and get back in the game.
Oh, thank goodness. So rallying is an action too, right?
Yep. It lets your champion get back on their feet at the cost of an action.
So every decision matters.
Exactly. Now let's talk skills.
Okay.
What makes Godtear really unique is that the skills aren't just about rolling dice and hitting things.
So there's got to be more to it, right?
Right. Each skill has a range. Some are for close-range combat. Others can reach across the board.
Ah, okay. So you got to be mindful of positioning even more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then there's accuracy and damage.
Dice rolls.
Dice rolls. Those determine if your attack hits and how much damage you inflict.
So you can have a powerful skill,
Right.
but if the dice aren't in your favor, you might miss entirely.
Exactly. And then there are the hit effects.
What are those?
These are special effects that can happen after a successful attack.
Oh, like what?
Well, some skills might move enemies, heal allies, or inflict all sorts of nasty status effects.
So it's not just about hitting hard, it's about what happens after you connect.
Exactly. Take the Glory Seekers, for example. Their Surround Pound skill actually gets stronger the more Glory Seekers you have surrounding the target.
Oh, wow. So you're rewarded for clever positioning and teamwork. Now, remember how we talked about the battle ladder and those bonus actions? Let's unravel those.
Yeah, this is where those champion classes come into play.
Oh, yeah. So what are these classes and how do they affect the game?
Well, if you're all about leading the charge and taking down enemy champions, then the Slayers might be your calling. They get bonus steps on the battle ladder for every champion they knock out.
Sounds like my kind of champion. But what if I'm more of a strategic player, focusing on controlling the battlefield and those objectives?
Then the Shapers are your best bet.
How so?
They get a bonus for every objective hex they claim, so they're all about maneuvering their forces and claiming those key locations.
So it's less about brute force and more about outsmarting your opponent. I like it. What about those who love to just mow down hordes of followers?
Ah. You're thinking of the Maelstroms.
Maelstroms? What do they do?
They're all about overwhelming their opponents with sheer numbers, gaining a bonus for every follower they take out.
So they're the crowd control specialists. What about the last class?
The Guardians. They're the immovable objects of Godtear.
Sounds defensive.
They're the masters of holding on to territory, earning bonus steps on the battle ladder for every banner they protect until the end of the turn.
So it's not just about attacking, it's about defending what you've earned. It's fascinating how each champion class offers a completely different way to approach the game.
Right, and that's just the beginning. But we'll have to pick up with those scenarios and more in the next segment.
Sounds good to me. There's so much to explore in Godtear. I can't wait to dive deeper.
All right, are you ready to jump back into the world of Godtear? We left off talking about those scenarios and how they shake things up.
Oh, I'm ready. Scenarios sound like the spice we need. What kind of craziness are we talking about?
Okay, imagine this. You're in the death scenario, right? And the battlefield is shrinking. Literally, like objective hexes just vanish into thin air.
Whoa, the objective hexes can just disappear.
Gone. Poof.
So suddenly that awesome spot you were holding might become a death trap.
Exactly. Talk about needing to adapt. And that's just one scenario. In Change, those objective hexes don't just disappear, they teleport.
Yeah, teleport. Like, bam, suddenly it's across the board.
Yep. Talk about unpredictable.
Okay, I see how scenarios add a whole new level of, chaos to the game.
Right. You got to think on your feet.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, I'm curious about something.
What's up?
We talked about those status effects, Boons and Blights.
Yeah, the rulebook mentions them, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on how they work.
Think of them like temporary buffs and debuffs.
Mm-hmm.
Boons are good. They enhance your models.
Mm-hmm. So they're like power-ups.
Exactly. They can make your models faster, tougher, you name it. Blights, on the other hand, are negative.
They weaken your opponent's models.
You got it. They can slow them down, make them more vulnerable, all sorts of nasty stuff.
Okay, so you're not just fighting with raw strength and skills, you're also using these status effects to your advantage. It's like a whole other layer of strategy.
It is.
Yeah.
Knowing when and how to use them is key. Like, imagine your champion's about to charge into a group of enemies, right? If you hit them with a speed boon, your champion just zips across the battlefield and attacks before they can react.
Oh, I get it. Or you could hit an enemy champion with a blight, slowing them down and making them an easy target.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, each boon and blight has a trigger and a duration. Some last for one action, others for the whole turn, or until something specific happens.
So it's all about timing. Like, you got to use them strategically, right? Not just randomly throw them around.
Right. It's like a puzzle, figuring out the best way to use them with your champion skills and the current scenario.
Man, the more we talk about Godtear, the more I realize how much depth it has. It's like every decision matters.
It does. But there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, deployment hexes.
Deployment hexes. Oh yeah, the rulebook mentions those. But we haven't really gone into how the game actually starts.
Right. Deployment hexes are where you set up your warband at the beginning of the game. And their location, it depends on the scenario you're playing.
Ah, so you've got to be strategic right from the start.
Exactly. You got to think about which hexes will give you the best starting position for the scenario you're playing.
Makes sense. And how do you decide who goes first?
Could be a coin flip, a dice roll, even a little pregame duel between you and your opponent.
Oh, that's fun. So basically, every little detail matters in Godtear, from choosing your champions to how you deploy them to those split-second decisions during the game is all part of the strategy.
It is. Now, I think it's time we circle back to those scenarios. You mentioned death and change, but what other kinds of scenarios are there?
Okay, yeah. Spill the beans. What other crazy scenarios can we expect?
Well, prepare to be amazed. Godtear has scenarios inspired by the Shattered Gods themselves.
Oh, that's cool. So, like, each scenario has its own unique flavor.
Exactly. We've got knowledge linked to Elian the Sage, the god of knowledge. This one adds a twist to the battle ladder.
A twist to the battle ladder. Okay, I'm listening.
So whoever wins the turn gets to move their warband token closer to the middle of the ladder, making it harder for the other player to catch up.
Ah, so it's not just about winning a turn, it's about maintaining a lead.
You got it. Now we have Quest, inspired by Trelinka the Huntress. This one. You only score points for banners planted on your opponent's side of the board.
Wait, what? So you have to be super aggressive, like push into enemy territory and take risks to score.
That's the name of the game in Quest. High risk, high reward.
I love it. And then there's Chaos, inspired by the trickster god himself.
Oh yeah, Chaos is a wild one.
How so?
The player who loses the turn gets to place a new objective hex on any empty hex.
Whoa, so the battlefield can literally change in the blink of an eye.
Exactly. Keeps you on your toes, right?
This is incredible. Godtear is so much more than just rolling dice and moving miniatures. It's like this intricate dance of strategy, chaos, and clever tactics.
And we've only just scratched the surface. But for now, let's take a breather and get ready for our final descent into Godtear. We'll be back to explore the end game, those final moments that determine victory.
Okay, so we're back, ready for the final showdown. We've talked about pretty much everything in Godtear, but how does it all come to an end? How do you actually win?
It all comes down to those banners, remember? The ones you plant on those objective hexes.
Right, the ones we're constantly fighting over.
Exactly. At the end of each turn, you get points based on how many banners you control and what kind they are.
Oh, so it's not enough to just capture those objective hexes. You got to hold on to them until the very end.
That's the game. It's like a constant tug of war, right? You could be winning all the fights, but if your opponent steals your banners at the last second,
they could sneak in and win the whole thing. Talk about tension. Now tell me, are all banners worth the same amount?
Good question. Remember those guardians we talked about, the masters of defense?
Yeah, the immovable objects.
Well, their banners are worth a whopping 5 points each at the end of the turn. Every other class, their banners are worth 4.
Whoa. So the Guardians get a bonus just for being good at protecting what they've earned.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
They're all about holding the line. And it gets even better for them. Remember those bonus steps on the battle ladder?
Oh, yeah. Each champion class gets a bonus for doing what they do best.
Well, Guardians get an extra step for each banner they control at the end of the turn.
So they're scoring more points and making it harder for their opponents to catch up. Talk about a double whammy.
Right. It really shows how, everything in Godtear is connected. It's not just about individual mechanics. It's about how they all work together.
Man, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. I feel like I've gone from Godtear newbie to, well, maybe not expert level, but definitely not a beginner anymore.
That's the goal. The rulebook gives you the basics, but the real fun starts when you actually get to play. Experiment, try different strategies, figure out what works for you.
And who knows, maybe we'll do another deep dive sometime, focusing on a specific champion or scenario.
There's always more to explore.
Well, to all our listeners out there, if you're looking for a tabletop game with tons of strategic depth, a unique setting, and endless possibilities, check out Godtear. It's been a blast diving into this world with you all.